You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, Donald Trump has now submitted a motion saying that he may seek removal of this Georgia case to federal court. What does that mean? Is he doing it or not?
So actually filing a motion telling the judge that you may do something in the future is not really a thing in the practice of criminal law. So I don't know what trick Donald Trump lawyers are trying to pull. But frankly, if I were the judge, I would probably reject the filing, and I would let the defense team know, if you are actually filing a motion to transfer your case from state court to federal court, that's fine. File a motion. But you don't need to file things telling me what you might or might not do in the future. I don't know if this is some kind of a half-baked delay tactic. I don't know if he did it for PR purposes, but I think this will only annoy the judge, and the judge will wait to see if there's a real file, if there's a real motion to transfer filed.
Now, these theatrics aside, if Trump ultimately does file a motion to remove this case from the state court system in Georgia to the federal court system, does he have a shot at succeeding?
I don't think so. I have described Mark Meadows' attempt to get his case transferred from state court to federal court as a steep uphill climb. I would look at Donald Trump's chances of getting his case transferred to federal court, like he was scaling a sheer rock wall that was straight up. I don't think Donald Trump has it in him to do that. But, whereas Mark Meadows, Brian, could perhaps conceivably say, look, the president told me to make phone calls. The president told me to set up meetings with Georgia state election officials. And I, acting within the scope of my official duties as chief of staff to the president, did those things. He has some minimal argument that some of what he did, not all of what he did, because much of what Mark Meadows did was criminal, but some of what he did was arguably within the scope of his official duties. The thing is, those meetings and those phone calls that he was setting up for Donald Trump was so Donald Trump could commit crimes in furtherance of his attempt to overturn the results of a state election. So I don't think Donald Trump has any argument that what he was doing was within the scope of the official duties of the president. So there may very well be a brief hearing on the matter if Donald Trump files the motion to transfer his case to federal court. But I'll tell you, I would bet the full buck, that's my betting limit, I would bet the full buck on the judge denying that motion to transfer.
And I hear you with all that, but just to game this out, just so that we're prepared in the event that it does work, that he does succeed at removing this thing, what would be working to his benefit here? Like, how may he actually be able to pull this off?
Yeah, it's a good question. In the unlikely event that the judge finds some reason to transfer Trump's case, I think most concrete benefit to Trump is it will be a broader jury pool, perhaps not quite so blue, not quite so Democrat, a jury pool. So that will help. That could potentially help pick a jury that has, more hardcore Republicans on it. And then the other thing is, he will have perhaps an enhanced opportunity to raise federal defenses. They're not winning defenses, but he might get a little bit more play on the immunity front, saying, you know what, some of these things that I was doing really were within the scope of my official duty. So I should perhaps enjoy some level of immunity. Again, I think that's a losing argument, regardless of what court Donald Trump ends up being prosecuted in. But those are a couple of the potential benefits of having this case tried in federal court instead of in state court.
Well, at least for the first argument, this idea that he would have a better chance with a jury pool that isn't so blue. If you want a jury pool that's not so blue, don't commit crimes in Fulton County, Georgia. I guess that would be the best advice I would have here. But because he did, I really don't know how that complaint is gonna play. Glenn, we've spoken about this before, but I think it's worth repeating here. If Trump is successful at removing this to the federal court system, would he then be able to pardon himself if he wins the presidency in 2024?
Yeah, always worth talking about, because when we talk about state court prosecutions, we know that a presidential pardon, a federal pardon, does not apply to state court convictions. When we talk about federal court convictions, presidential pardons do apply. A president can pardon somebody for a federal court conviction. So it kind of feels like if the case gets transferred from state court to federal court, well, then couldn't you use a presidential pardon? And the answer is no, because even though this is a little counterintuitive, if the case gets transferred, it's still a state court case. It is still brought in violation of Georgia state law. It is still prosecuted by Georgia state prosecutors. It just so happens that the forum, the court in which the case is tried, is a federal court, but it remains a state case, and a president cannot pardon somebody who is convicted after having their case removed from state court to federal court.
So what's the point of removing it to the federal court system if Donald Trump wouldn't be able to pardon himself, which, by the way, we don't even know if he'd be able to do. But that notwithstanding, is this just to get away from a Fulton County jury?
I think that's the primary reason and the primary potential benefit to Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump might think that he'll get a little bit more play with a federal court judge than he would with a Georgia state court judge. But I think it's worth keeping in mind that the federal judge who's handling at least Mark Meadows' removal hearing, and presumably he would be presiding over the case in the event Mark Meadows and Donald Trump's cases get removed to federal court, is an Obama appointee. Now, you know what? He's a straight up judge. He's a respected jurist. But in this day and age, we are forever, talking about which president appointed which federal court judge.
And finally, do we have an update on the Mark Meadows removal situation? Because at least this could inform a little bit of what we can expect in the inevitable Donald Trump removal effort.
Yeah, this has been a real cliffhanger because the hearing concluded last week. The judge asked the parties to brief up a particular issue. Those briefs were submitted on Thursday. And so we are sitting here waiting. We do expect we're going to get a decision any day because at least part of the Georgia case is on the fast track to go to trial in October. So I think it's really important that this transfer question be settled, at least with respect to Mark Meadows. And of course, Donald Trump hasn't yet filed a motion, though he said maybe he will, maybe he won't.
Okay, and finally, is there a deadline that Donald Trump has to make this decision as to whether or not he's going to try to at least file a motion to transfer? Is there a deadline that he has to do this by?
Yeah, I believe the rules provide that there is a 30-day window from the time you are arraigned in the case until the time you are required to file a motion to transfer your case if you're going to. So I think 30 days after the date of his arraignment, I think he still has a couple of weeks left, but then that window will close and then Donald Trump's case will certainly be tried in state court.
Okay, well, obviously a lot to stay on top of here as we wait to see whether all of these filings succeed for Donald Trump and his co-defendants here. So we'll stay on top of this stuff. And if those of you watching want to stay on top of everything, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.